That morning, under a light drizzle, Truong returned after days of disappearing and gently took Tieu Nu's hand as they walked into the clinic. Neither of them spoke a word, only their eyes revealed confusion and trembling emotion. The cold air of the white room made every breath feel heavy. When the doctor turned on the ultrasound screen, the sound of a tiny heartbeat filled the room. Soft, pure, yet enough to make them both stop breathing. Tieu Nu lowered her head, her hand trembling as it clenched tightly, while Truong stood silently behind her, his heart racing between love and doubt. Outside, Truong's mother and Hao sat waiting, their eyes fixed on the still-closed door. Every minute passed like eternity. No one knew what would come when that door finally opened, whether it would be redemption of trust or the birth of a new pain. One sheet of paper, one truth, could change their lives forever. Tieu Nu hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. Her hand was small, icy cold, trembling, as if wanting to pull away. Truong tightened his grip slightly, saying nothing, just guiding her step by step. In that moment, their hands intertwined, fragile, yet the only warmth they could find amid the storm inside their hearts. Inside the hallway was bright white and silent. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, blending with the scent of rain from outside. Tieu Nu moved a little closer to Truong as a nurse passed by. He looked at her, noticing her thin shoulders trembling. Despite the doubts filling his heart, for that brief moment, he just wanted to protect her, like the days when their love was still tender and full of warmth. The nurse called Tieu Nu's name, her voice calm yet heavy enough to make both their hearts sink. Truong held her hand and gave a small nod. "Let's go," he said softly, his voice tight with emotion. Tieu Nu nodded slightly, gripping his hand tighter as if afraid she'd collapse if she let go. The clinic door opened and they stepped inside together, leaving behind the long, cold corridor with its sterile white light. The small clinic room was brightly lit. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a serious face but kind eyes, gestured for them to sit. The air felt compressed inside the room, heavy and still, with only the quiet hum of the fan breaking the silence. Tieu Nu sat on the examination bed, slowly lifting her shirt to reveal a small curve on her belly. She lowered her head, avoiding Truong's eyes, while he stood beside her, holding her hand tightly, his fingers trembling slightly. The doctor carefully spread a layer of cold gel on her skin, then gently placed the ultrasound probe on her abdomen. A low, rhythmic sound filled the room, steady pulsing like a hidden heartbeat echoing from the dark. Truong held his breath, eyes fixed on the screen. Tieu Nu closed hers, her lashes trembling, gripping his hand tighter as if afraid she would fall apart if he let go. On the screen, a faint shape slowly came into focus, tiny but alive. The doctor smiled softly and said, "The heartbeat is clear and everything looks good." "About 8 weeks. 8 weeks." The words hit Truong like a bolt of lightning. He heard every syllable but couldn't react. His hand twitched slightly. Tieu Nu felt it. She opened her eyes, looked at him, then quickly turned away. In that glance were fear, sorrow, and a quiet plea for him to trust her just once more. The doctor continued the examination, her movements careful and deliberate, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Each time the machine sounded, Truong's heart pounded faster. He couldn't tell what he was feeling: worry, confusion, or pain. The cold from Tieu Nu's hand seeped into his stirring and need to hold her close, yet he was afraid of his own weakness. Finally, the doctor wrote a few notes in the file and turned to them. "Everything looks fine. No signs of complications. Try to stay calm and positive. I'll schedule your next checkup soon." Truong nodded, but his chest felt heavy. The doctor's words faded into the background. All he could see was Tieu, her red-rimmed eyes, her lips pressed tight. When the doctor turned away, he squeezed her hand again. Tieu looked up and met his gaze. In that brief moment, with 1,000 unspoken words between them, there was only one thing left: fear of losing each other. Outside the clinic, the narrow hallway stretched on the sound of footsteps, echoing faintly mixed with the hum of the air conditioner. Hao sat on a gray plastic bench, her hands tightly intertwined, turning pale from the pressure. Truong's mother sat beside her, her small frame giving off an aura of quiet worry. They were both silent, only occasionally glancing at the clinic door, behind which Truong and Tieu still hadn't emerged. Time seemed to slow. Every second, every minute that passed felt like a weight pressing down on their chests. Hao glanced at the clock, then back at the door, her breath heavy. She didn't say anything, but inside her mind was a swirl of thoughts. Ever since she'd heard that Tieu was pregnant, something inside her had felt off. Everything had come too suddenly, and Truong's reaction only deepened her unease. Truong's mother sat still, her gaze deep and distant. She didn't speak, only gently stroked the wooden bracelet on her wrist. The lines on her forehead became more defined as she frowned, each breath slow and heavy. In her heart, there was not only concern for her son, who was tormented by doubt, but also a deep regret, because she knew if the results today weren't what they hoped for, it wouldn't just be one broken heart. As they left the room, Tieu walked slowly with Truong silently by her side. The lingering smell of disinfectant felt suffocating to him. Truong looked down at their intertwined hands, trembling weak, but still holding on. He knew that ahead of them lay the result, the answer to everything. But in that moment, in the cold, bright hospital hallway, he just wished time would stop. The atmosphere in the waiting room thickened when they approached the reception desk, where the doctor was preparing the final result. The ticking of the wall clock was steady, each tick like a needle poking into Truong's chest. He stood still, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the small door leading to the lab. Tieu sat beside him, her hands clutching each other tightly on her stomach, her fingers ice cold. Everything around them seemed to fall into a deep silence. Hao and Truong's mother stood at a distance in the hallway, too nervous to approach. They could only watch, anxious, helpless, and filled with unease. The thin piece of paper, so light, yet carrying the weight of 3 lives, hadn't been handed over yet. The doctor finally stepped out, her face calm and professional. She held a white envelope, looking at the couple in front of her with a soft, deep gaze. "The results are in," she said, her voice breaking the stillness like the toll of a bell. Tieu trembled slightly, and Truong's heart raced so loudly he could almost hear it. He reached out to take the envelope, his hand shaking. The paper was light, so thin, it seemed the wind could carry it away, but it felt as heavy as the entire sky. Tieu looked at him, her eyes full of worry, hoping for even the smallest glimmer of hope. He slowly opened the envelope, the paper rustling softly, but the sound seemed to echo like thunder. The words appeared clearly on the paper, black and white. Truong read them slowly, each word striking his heart. Test result 99.8% match. Father-child relationship confirmed. He stood frozen. A wave of relief and emotion flooded through him, almost suffocating him. His hand trembled as his eyes lingered on the 3 words confirmed. Tieu looked at him, tears spilling from her eyes too fast for her to stop. She said nothing, only lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Truong looked up at her, holding her gaze for a long moment. In that look, all the doubt and anger vanished. Only a quiet regret remained, the regret for the days he had been silent cold, letting her suffer alone. He reached out gently, touching her hand. It was still cold, but no longer trembling. Outside, Hao and Truong's mother saw them. His mother sighed, her tired eyes showing both exhaustion and relief. Hao turned away, hiding her teary eyes. She knew this result was something to celebrate, but in her heart there was still a nameless heavy void. Truong walked over to Tieu, speaking softly, without words, just a hand, squeeze a look, filled with remorse. She looked up, tears still resting on her lashes. In that brief moment, they returned to the beginning, when they believed that holding each other's hand was enough. The doctor smiled, gently, nodded, and then left. The room was left with only the sound of rain falling against the window, steady like a heartbeat, slowly finding its rhythm again. Tieu placed her hand on her stomach, gently caressing it. She could feel the warmth inside, the warmth of new life, the warmth of a faith once broken, now rekindled by the truth. Truong leaned down, his voice low and mixed with a sigh. "I'm sorry." The words were brief, but they carried all his inner turmoil. Tieu didn't respond, only tilted her head slightly and nodded. She knew those words weren't just for today, but for the long nights he had turned away, for the times she silently cried alone and doubted. As they stepped out of the clinic, the rain had stopped. The wet road reflected the weak midday sun. Tieu walked slowly, each step heavier but firmer. Truong walked beside her, saying nothing, just holding her hand tightly. That hand was no longer just a fragile thread between them. It was a promise late but sincere. Truong's mother watched them from a distance, then smiled softly. She turned to Hao and spoke lightly, as if the wind itself had whispered the words, "What's real will eventually come to light, my dear." Hao nodded silently, offering a forced smile, then watched as their figures slowly disappeared down the sunlit road. Ahead, the gentle light stretched out, casting its glow on the shoulders of 2 people who had weathered the storm. All the doubt and pain still lingered, but in that moment, between the warmth of their hands and the echo of the heartbeat still ringing in their memories, they understood that some things only when on the verge of losing them do we learn to truly appreciate.
Con phải nhớ, con vẫn còn đôi mi và mình còn đang đợi con. Mọi người đều vậy. Hãy tiếp tục hướng về phía trước. tiến về phía trước, ở đâu đó sâu thẳm bên trong có điều gì đó cần phải lại lại